Is it ever too late to fix a broken past? Join us as we navigate the difficult road to redemption and the price of seeking forgiveness in a world that never forgets. Subscribe today and watch these powerful stories of hope and change.
The watch my mentor gave me on my first day at the company was still on my wrist the morning his son-in-law told me to clear out my desk. I remember looking down at it while Derek spoke. Gold-plated, a little scratched on the left side from the time I'd caught it on a filing cabinet corner during a late-night audit session 7 years ago. Robert had laughed when I showed him the scratch. "That means it's working," he'd said. "A watch that never gets scratched, never goes anywhere." Derek did not laugh at anything that morning. Derek did not look at me at all. He was reading from his phone when I walked into what used to be Robert's office. The furniture was already different. The old oak desk Robert had brought from his father's study was gone, replaced with something sleek and glass that reflected the ceiling lights in a way that made me squint. Derek hadn't even been in the building 48 hours, and somehow he'd already managed to make a room that smelled like Robert for 18 years. Smell like nothing. "Sit down, Nora," he said, still looking at his phone. I sat. He finally put the phone face down on the desk. He looked at me the way people look at a line item they've decided to cut. Not with anger, not with cruelty exactly, just with the flat certainty of someone who has already made the calculation and is only now doing the paperwork. "I've spent the last week reviewing the leadership structure," he said. "And I think we both know this company needs a fresh direction." I had worked for Harrington Logistics for 16 years. I had started as an accounts coordinator making $41,000 a year, eating lunch at my desk because I couldn't afford the sandwich place downstairs. Robert had promoted me to controller after 3 years, to VP of finance after 7, and to CFO 18 months ago, 6 months before his first stroke, which meant I had been running the financial operations of this company largely alone through the worst period of its founder's life. We had grown revenue by 22% in that time. We had renegotiated 4 major carrier contracts, expanded into 2 new regional markets, and kept the company solvent through a supply chain disruption that had guttered 3 of our competitors. I knew what fresh direction meant. I had known since the moment Robert's daughter called to tell me her husband would be taking an active leadership role in the company. "I appreciate everything you've done for Harrington," Derek said, "but I think it's time we brought in someone whose vision aligns more closely with where we're going." "Where are we going?" I asked. My voice was calm. I had practiced being calm about this for weeks. He smiled. It was the kind of smile that doesn't reach anything. "That's really a conversation for the new team." He slid an envelope across the glass desk. 3 months severance, a standard NDA, a clause about non-disparagement. I looked at the papers for a moment. I thought about Robert in the hospital bed 2 weeks before he died, his right hand trembling slightly as he held mine, telling me he was sorry for what was coming. "I fixed it," he had said. "I fixed it the best I could, Nora. You'll understand when you read the letter." I hadn't understood when you read the letter. I hadn't understood then. I thought he meant the severance package. I thought he was apologizing for not being able to protect my job. I signed the NDA. I picked up my bag. I walked past the glass desk and the ceiling-reflecting furniture and the receptionist who wouldn't meet my eyes, and I took the elevator down to the lobby and stood on the sidewalk in the November cold and thought, "Robert, what did you fix?" The letter was in a sealed envelope in the back of the filing cabinet in my home office, where Robert's attorney had sent it 2 days after the funeral. I had put it there because I wasn't ready to read it. Robert had been my boss for 16 years and my mentor for almost as long, and the grief of losing him was still too fresh and too shapeless for me to sit with his words on paper. I read it that night, standing at the kitchen counter in my coat, because I hadn't bothered to take it off. It was 4 pages, handwritten, in the careful, deliberate cursive of a man who'd known his hands were failing him and had written slowly to compensate. "Nora," it began. "By the time you read this, Derek will have done exactly what I told Margaret he would do. I want you to know that I tried to stop it through other means first. I talked to my daughter for 6 months. I talked to the board. I talked to Derek himself once, which I deeply regret. None of it worked, so I did the only thing I had left to do. 18 months ago, when you became CFO and I knew my health was not going to improve, I began transferring my shares. Not to my daughter, not to Derek, not to the board members who have been angling for control of this company since my second stroke. To you. The transfer was completed in 3 stages over 14 months, structured by my attorney specifically to survive legal challenge. As of the date of my death, you hold 53% of Harrington Logistics. You are the majority shareholder, Nora. You have been for 4 months. Derek does not know this because he never bothered to look. I had to put the letter down. I stood there with my hands flat on the counter looking at nothing. He had been planning this since before I knew there was anything to plan for. He had watched Derek maneuver and scheme and charm his wife into handing over influence, and he had quietly, methodically, built me a floor to land on that Derek didn't even know existed. I thought about Derek's face that morning. The flat certainty. The phone face down on the glass desk. The way he had said fresh direction like he was already somewhere else. I picked up the letter and kept reading. I need to ask you to wait, Robert had written. I know that will be hard. But if you move too quickly, Derek will fight it, and even a fight he can't win will damage the company and the people in it. Wait until he shows the board what he actually intends to do with this company. Let them see it. Then you won't just be the owner, you'll be the rescue. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my coat pocket. Then I called my attorney. Waiting was the hardest thing I have ever done professionally. I had spent 16 years solving problems the moment I identified them. It was the thing Robert had always said made me good at the job, the inability to let a problem sit. And now I was watching Derek dismantle everything we had built, piece by piece, while I sat in the apartment I'd sublet in my sister's building and did nothing. I heard things through the network that forms naturally in any company when people are worried. My former assistant called me once a week, ostensibly to check in, actually to report. Marcus from Carrier Relations sent me a LinkedIn message that was technically about a reference but contained enough between the lines to fill a memo. The head of our Dallas operation, a woman named Beverly who had been with Harrington since before I arrived, sent me a text in February that just said, "Nora, please, tell me you know something we don't know." I texted back, "Give me 60 days. What Derek was doing was methodical in its own way, which almost impressed me. He wasn't looting the company crudely. He was restructuring it in a direction that would benefit a competitor, specifically a regional logistics firm in which, my attorney had discovered, Derek held a quiet 15% ownership stake through a shell company. He was steering Harrington's best contracts toward that competitor under the guise of vendor consolidation. He was driving out the experienced operations staff and replacing them with people he'd brought from his previous company. People who knew his preferences and asked fewer questions. The board was not stupid. They could see the numbers moving. But Derek had cultivated 2 of the 5 board members carefully over the previous year, and the other 3 were conflict-averse in the way that people become when they've been comfortable for a long time. They needed someone to make the decision easy for them. Robert had told me to wait until Derek showed the board what he intended. By March, he'd shown them enough. I called my attorney on a Thursday evening. "I think it's time," I said. "I've been waiting for you to say that," she said. The board meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday. Derek had called it himself a quarterly review, routine on its surface, but I'd heard from my former assistant that he intended to use it to push through a major contract reassignment that would have effectively transferred Harrington's most profitable regional accounts to his competitor. I arrived at the building at 8 in the morning, the same lobby where I had stood 4 months ago in the November cold, the same elevator. I was wearing the same coat actually, the charcoal wool one I'd bought the year Robert promoted me to VP. The one that still fit exactly the same because some things in your life stay consistent even when everything else doesn't. The receptionist on the executive floor was new. She didn't recognize me. She asked if I had an appointment. "I'm a shareholder," I said. "I have the right to attend any board meeting." I handed her the documentation my attorney had prepared. The share transfer records, the legal notice of majority had prepared. The share transfer records, the legal notice of majority ownership. The formal request for board recognition that had been filed with the state 3 weeks earlier, and which Derek had apparently not been informed of, because his attorney had never responded. She made a phone call. Then another one. Then she looked at me with an expression that I recognized. The expression of someone who has just understood that the situation they are in is much larger than the situation they were told they were in. And she said, "Please have a seat, Miss Harrington." She used Robert's last name by accident. I didn't correct her. 20 minutes later, the board's outside counsel came down to the lobby personally. He was a man I'd worked with for years, a careful, methodical attorney named Patterson, who had the quality of someone who has seen a great many surprising things and learned to show very little of it on his face. He was showing some of it now. Nora, he said. Patterson, the documentation is in order, he said. It was not a question. Completely. He nodded once, slowly, in the way of someone recalibrating. The board meeting starts in 40 minutes, he said. Would you like coffee while you wait? I don't know exactly what happened in the 15 minutes before I walked into that conference room, but I know it involved a great deal of hurried phone calling, because when I entered, 3 of the 5 board members were already standing in a way that suggested they had just sat back down very recently. Derek was at the head of the table. He was looking at the door when I walked in, and I watched his face go through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, recognition, and then something that was trying to become contempt but couldn't quite complete the journey, because some part of him had already started calculating what my presence meant. What is she doing here? He said. He was talking to Patterson, not to me. Mr. Voss, Patterson said carefully. Ms. Harrington is here in her capacity as majority shareholder of this company. Derek laughed. It was a short, clipped sound. That's not possible. The transfer was completed in 3 stages over 14 months and filed with the state 4 weeks ago, I said. I sat down at the far end of the table, across from him, and put Robert's watch on the table between us where everyone could see it. I don't know why I did that, it just felt right. Your attorney was served legal notice. If he didn't receive it, that's a conversation to have with him, not with me. The silence in that conference room was the particular kind of silence that forms when several people simultaneously realize that the story they thought they were in is not the story they are in. Derek said very quietly, Robert wouldn't do this. Robert did exactly this, I said, 18 months ago, before the second stroke. Before you started moving contracts to Viridian Freight. I watched his face when I said the name of his competitor, Patterson. How many board members were aware of Mr. Voss's ownership stake in Viridian? 2 of them had known. One of them, the one on the far end who had been Derek's most reliable ally, looked at the table. The other 2 were looking at Derek with expressions I knew well. They were the expressions of people who had been uncomfortable for months and had just been given permission to act on it. I want to call my attorney, Derek said. That's your right, I said. Call anyone you want, I'll be here. He fought it, of course. Robert had warned me he would. There were 4 months of legal maneuvering, a filing that challenged the mental competency of Robert at the time of the transfer, which his personal physician, 3 nurses and 2 independent neurologists swiftly disposed of, and a campaign, conducted mainly through Derek's allies in industry circles, to characterize what had happened as some kind of manipulation by a calculating employee. I let my attorney handle most of it. I focused on the company. The board removed Derek as CEO the day after the meeting on an emergency basis, citing breach of fiduciary duty. Beverly came back from Dallas. Marcus stayed. The new hires Derek had brought in, the ones who'd known his preferences and asked fewer questions, left mostly on their own when they understood the new situation. The carrier contracts that had been in the process of being redirected to Viridian were renegotiated and retained. I hired an interim CEO while the legal proceedings were ongoing, a woman named Octavia who had restructured 2 logistics companies in the previous decade and who was one of the most competent people I have ever worked alongside. She ran the operations. I handled the board and the legal. We had a standing call every morning at 7:30. The regulatory inquiry into Derek's self-dealing arrangements with Viridian started in the summer. I cooperated fully. I'll leave the rest of that story to the public record. There is a thing that happens, I've found, when you survive something like this. People want it to be a triumphant story. They want the part where you walk back into the building and the whole office applauds, or the part where the villain gets his public comeuppance, or the moment where you stand at the head of a conference table and deliver the line that the movie version of you has been rehearsing for the entire 3rd act. The truth is messier and quieter than that. The truth is that on the night after the board meeting, I sat in my car in the parking garage for a long time before I could drive home. Not because I was upset, because I was exhausted in a way that went down into the bone, and because Robert was not there, and because winning something on behalf of someone who isn't alive anymore is a strange grief all its own. I thought about what he'd said in the hospital. I fixed it the best I could. He had fixed it. He had seen what was coming and he had built something to stop it, and he had trusted me to understand what to do with it when the time came. That is one of the most significant things anyone has ever done for me in my professional life, and I will carry the weight of it for a long time. I also thought about what I hadn't done well. I had been so focused on the company, on Robert, on the strategy and the legal filings and the board relationships, that I had not called my sister back for 3 weeks during the worst of the legal fight. My niece's school play was in April, and I missed it. There was a dinner I was supposed to attend in February that I cancelled at the last minute, and the friend I cancelled on was gracious about it, but I saw something shift between us that hasn't fully shifted back. Robert sacrificed a great deal for this company. I admired him for it for 16 years and never once asked him if he regretted it. I should have asked him that. I don't intend to make the same choice he made. I love this company. I believe in what it can be, but I know now in a way I didn't know before that a company is not a life, and that the watch on my wrist is keeping track of something more important than business hours. Octavia is still with Harrington. She took the permanent CEO role in January. I'm the chair of the board and the majority shareholder, which means I do the work I'm actually good at, the strategic and financial oversight, the long-term decisions, without drowning in the operational details that Octavia handles better than I ever could have. Beverly is still running Dallas. Marcus got the promotion he'd been waiting for 2 years. My former assistant, who had been quietly keeping me informed through all of it, is now the VP of Corporate Affairs. She knows the company better than almost anyone in it, and it was long past time someone recognized that. Derek's legal matter is ongoing. I won't speculate about the outcome. Robert's office has been converted into a conference room. There's a small plaque beside the door with his name and the years he ran the company. Sometimes when I'm in the building late, I walk past it and put my hand on the door frame for a second. He told me once that the best leaders are the ones who build things that outlast them. He was talking about systems and cultures and the way organizations hold their values even when individuals leave. But I think he was also talking about something else, about the small deliberate acts of preparation that nobody sees. The 14-month share transfer, the 4-page letter, the trust placed quietly in someone who won't know they've been trusted until the moment they need to be. The watch still runs. The scratch on the left side is still there. I've added a second one, smaller, from the corner of my laptop bag during a particularly bad week in March, when I thought the legal challenge might actually go somewhere. That means it's working, Robert would have said. I think he would have been right. I've thought a lot about what Robert actually gave me, and I don't mean the shares. He gave me those, yes. 53% transferred quietly over 14 months while his hands were shaking and his doctors were telling him to rest. But the shares were just the mechanism. What he actually gave me was the evidence of his own thinking, the proof that he had watched me work for 16 years and decided, without ever making a production of it, that I was someone worth protecting. That is not a small thing to carry. It changes the way you understand your own history. I used to think my career was a story about competence, about showing up and doing the work and being good enough at it that opportunities came. And that's part of it. But watching what Derek did in 4 months, how quickly he could have undone what took Robert decades to build, made me understand that competence alone doesn't protect anything. What protected Harrington wasn't my financial acumen or my tenure or my relationships with the board. What protected it was that one person at the right moment made an ethical choice. He chose the company over his family's comfort. He chose the long term over the easy path. He chose honesty about what Derek was, even when that honesty cost him something personal. That's the part I keep returning to, not the legal victory, not the board meeting, not Derek's face when Patterson read out the share percentages. What I keep returning to is the image of Robert, in a hospital bed with a trembling hand, writing 4 pages of careful cursive because he had decided that the truth deserved to be recorded properly. He didn't have to do it that way. He could have let events unfold. He could have told himself that families are complicated and that it wasn't his place to intervene in what his daughter had chosen. A lot of people would have made that choice, and I would not have blamed him. Instead, he spent 14 months building something in silence, alone, because he believed it was the right thing to do. That is what I mean when I say the watch is the least of what he left me. I made mistakes in all of this too. I was so focused on the strategy, the waiting, the documentation, the timing, that I let other things slip. Relationships. Moments that don't come back. I missed my niece's play. I went weeks without returning calls, and the strange thing is that I understood exactly why I was doing it, which somehow made it worse. I knew the cost. I paid it anyway. That's not strength. That's a habit I picked up somewhere in 16 years of putting the work first. and it's one I'm still working to break. What I know now is that integrity compounds the same way debt does. Every decision Robert made, to be honest about what he saw, to act on it even when it was inconvenient, to trust someone else with something that mattered, created the conditions for what happened. And every choice Derek made, the self-dealing, the shortcuts, the assumption that no one was paying close enough attention, created the conditions for that too. Not as punishment, just as consequence. The outcomes were built long before the board meeting. They were built in the daily choices that nobody was watching. I think about that when decisions feel small. They don't stay small.